Support for higher education in focus comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, serving alumni and alma mater for 145 years. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. Penn State Bookstore, improving the student experience at Penn State with philanthropic support of student causes throughout the university. On the Hub Lawn or at psu.bncollege.com. The attorneys of McNeese, Wallace, and Nurek. Your mission, your goal, your lawyers. More at mwn.com. And from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Higher Education in Focus. I'm Patty Satalia with my co-host, Penn State President Dr. Eric Barron. The National Recycling Coalition recently named Penn State Best of the Best for its exceptional program in recycling and for, quote, connecting higher education and industry. Penn State beat out more than 70 other universities in the running. Today, Penn State diverts more than 60% of its solid waste from the landfill, and they're pushing to do even better. So how exactly is Penn State closing the loop on waste? And why is the emphasis on reducing and reusing with recycling as the last resort? Here to talk with us about that is Al Matyasovsky, Program Manager of Central Support Services in Penn State's Office of Physical Plant. He's the university's waste management guru. He created Penn State's patent-pending READY Index, a tool that's poised to become the global standard for measuring solid waste efficiencies. We'll find out more about that. Also with us is Brian Black, Professor of History and Environmental Studies at Penn State Altoona. He's also one of the faculty who spearheaded the creation of an environmental studies major at Penn State Altoona. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And first, congratulations. Best of the best really is saying something. I realize that this is your job, but you are passionate about waste management.
Well, I'm passionate about being part of Penn State University, and waste management's my assignment, if you will. But being the best of the best, it really is about the faculty, staff, and students that support our program every day by making the informed decision to drop it in the bin, and then the waste management team, the other part of the magic, they collect it and we get it off to market. So it's a wonderful partnership, if you will.
You know, it's hard not to see that there is, a mindset at Penn State University that we're going to recycle. But I'd like you to explain, if you would, how Penn State went from recycling less than a ton of waste 25 years ago to more than 10,000 tons today.
Well, we do a lot of auditing. Everything starts with an audit, and then we look for the low-hanging fruit potentials. We find market. We consult with the Center County Recycling and Refuse Authority. So we're always partnering with folks, and that dynamic, and then having a campus community that supports what we suggest, and a little bit of information, a little bit of training, a little bit of putting the bins in the right place. We now have more than 5,000 recycling bins on our campus. All of that dynamic makes it simple to recycle, and we have a really wonderful group of people at Penn State University that want to do the appropriate thing, not the right thing. I hate to say it that way.
But going from 1 to 10,000, I mean, I was here at Penn State when it was 1. There must be some areas that are challenging to have gotten to that point.
We were the first, thank you, Dr. Barron, we were the first in the state to recycle food waste, to compost it. In fact, it was against the law when we did it. We were doing research, and we had Dr. Ali from the College of Ag Engineering who did the study. We presented it to DEP, and based upon the study that was done here at the Pollock Foods Dock, they said they would change the law and allow food waste to be part of our stream. Now, you might think that that's not a big deal, but we knew that food waste was 40% of that stream, and the potential of that stream is well over 5,000 tons. So we tapped into that handily, and we keep increasing our capture. We've now moved into our academic buildings, where you can now compost in every building on Penn State's campus where people reside at the university. So it's those kinds of things that we were able to do. But again, that great community that supports us is the reason that it's worked so well.
Mm. Brian Black, you have studied the history of environmentalism. Just how unique is what's happening at Penn State, and how do you get a culture like the one here?
Well, it's such an honor to be here, well, with all of you, but especially with Al, because we hold him in such high regard because of these accomplishments. It is,
Thank you.
It's path-breaking. And if you think in terms of my specialty, environmental history, we know what the past looked like when people began to think about organic goods, began to think about a counterculture movement in the 1960s. And for many of us, that's what we think of in terms of environmentalism or environmental thought. One of the reasons I really wanted to talk with you today is I think we're at such an exciting moment, because what we have in front of us, this might be the single best example of, is a time when those ideas that were just seeds in the 1960s have now become a new economy, really, a new way to sustain ourselves and the way we live in a way that frankly I find the students today expect. And so in that way, it makes Penn State look so ahead of the curve to me, from my vantage point, because we have this kind of activity not happening in many other places to this scale in the country.
Can I just probe that a little bit? Because I remember back at that time period, my dad happened to work for an aluminum company, and they were recycling cans, and he was very proud, and he went to a meeting and realized it was for PR, and that they only later realized that this was saving them energy in recycling aluminum. And then I remember the same thing in New Haven, where they had a big recycling program, and they made it against the law for anybody who was interested in recycling to bring their material into New Haven, because it was actually a loss leader. They didn't want anybody else's waste. They didn't want anybody else to be participating in this. They were doing this, and it looked good for the city. But you said there's a whole industry. So do we make money now?
Well, and maybe Al can answer that in terms of the university, but yes, it seems to me that you're certainly saving from the different projects that you take on in terms of what the physical plant needs and uses. But then there are opportunities to do exactly that, to make it into an opportunity to create economic gain. And I do think you're right at the frontier of that in the efforts that we've seen here.
Well, at this point, you're recycling or reusing 105 items. That's huge.
It is.
What are some of the difficult ones to
Plastics,
get out of the stream?
Plastics is the one that people are most confused about, actually. And but we tell everybody to pitch it in. If you're not sure, you can always send me an email or stick it in an envelope and mail it to me, which I receive real junk mail at Penn State, and I do respond. But those are the ones that people are most confused about. But the fact that they're asking every day, I get questions about it, and that's really heartening, that people want to do the right thing. So out of that 105, everybody knows what aluminum is and a newspaper is. When you get into polypropylene and those types of plastics, and whether it's rigid or stretchy film, and that's when it gets just a little bit confusing.
And so, not to ask an embarrassing question, but just because I feel guilty, if I do it wrong, how bad is it?
It isn't bad at all. The national average of contamination in the United States is 20%. We are consistently below 3 because we are source separated. So if you do it wrong, it's not a big deal, because the county are the people that pull the materials out, and they do it appropriately and for a very good fee. So we're fortunate to have the Center County Refuse and Recycling
as a supporter,
folks, as a supporter.
Partner.
Absolutely, yes.
You mentioned something a moment ago, Brian, about where we are in comparison with other people in the country, and that brings me to this READY Index, this Penn State Patent Ready Index, REDI, that will be a tool used to measure the efficiency of all of this nationwide, or globally, actually.
Yeah, REDI stands for Response Diversion Index, and you plug all of your weights in there. It does calculate your program, and so you get varying ratings, the silver, the bronze, the typical types of ratings that you hear. A certificate will be produced for you, and when you're a member of the READY Index, you get to see everyone else's materials, and you can make queries. So, Patty, you're over in California, and I'm sitting in Pennsylvania, and I don't know what to do with low-density polyethylene film, but I can click on LDPE, and I can click on the different types of facilities that may be yours, and up will come your information because you have a green response, and then I have your contact information, and I can ask you, what do you do with LDPE? That's the way it's designed to work, that relational database. It also has a potentials audit. If you were to do a waste audit, plug it into the potentials category and hit the button, it will tell you what you ought to be recycling based upon your total tonnage as opposed to what you're currently, and that's an instantaneous thing. As opposed to pulling files out and doing a lot of math problems, the Ready Index will tell you where you need to be.
What does it mean, Dr. Barron, to have a patent created by a program here at Penn State?
Well, you know what, I always like it when you know, we're the best, and everybody worries about rankings, and you know, you take a lot of pleasure out of that. I mean, first of all, it shows commitment. It shows you have a superb staff that cares deeply about what they're doing. But the whole notion that because of what you've accomplished, people come to you to see improvement, and you've taken it upon yourself not just to serve essentially the university, but this entire community. That's huge.
There are some who say that the day when we'll be mining landfills is not that far off, and I'm wondering, Brian, if you think that's true.
Well, how do you mean that, mining landfills?
Well, the fact that things that you're now pulling out of the waste stream for years and years were dumped into the waste stream, and now we're seeing that there is a value in these products that we threw out.
Wow, it would be quite a trash to treasure opportunity, wouldn't it, if the landfills could suddenly be something that we could make productive instead of just being a symbol of not knowing what to do with so many things when they're past their life cycle.
Well, I think that was a cue. He mentioned trash to treasure. Have you
did,
been to it, Dr.
yes.
Barron?
I have not yet been to a trash. I have been to a trash to treasure, but not our trash to treasure.
We're the first trash to treasure, aren't we?
Well, we're the ones that coined the phrase, and we're the ones that took the materials that our students donated, our wonderful students, in their generosity. More than 800 tons we have been able to sell at a sale that is supported by the United Way with the wonderful volunteers of the United Way that set up the sale.
So explain what happens. I mean, students are leaving campus and they have furniture and products that they don't need, and they used to throw them
Ford
into
Stryker, our AVP of Physical Plant, asked the question to me more than 13 years ago, where don't we do the best job? And one of the things was student move out in the spring. I said, we put 17 30-yard roll-offs out, the students throw the stuff in, and it goes to a landfill. And what Ford did was ask Fraser Greger, then director, now retired, if he would look at the possibility of improving that. So he pulled together a committee. I was one of the folks on the committee because I'm the trash guy. And we talked about what would be a way to attack that stream, and we put a plan together, and we were told by the lawyers at Penn State we need to placard up an area where the students could donate the materials, because we're not allowed to go in the students' room and take materials because of the escheat law. And so all these donations, and I made the prediction we probably get about 15 tons, a big number. We got over 75 tons the first year, and we've not been below 60 tons except for this past year, but just slightly below. And we take those materials, which are gently used goods, and we put them in a sale. It's a big yard sale, one-day sale in Beaver Stadium. We've been to 2 other locations out of those 13 years, and all the money benefits the Center County United Way.
So it's win-win.
It's win-win, and because of that not going to the landfill, we save money, and that money raising, I sit on the board of the United Way, and those dollars helping our neighbors in need through the varying agencies of the United Way. In 13 years, that program has raised an unbelievable $661,000. So this was landfill-bound waste that now has raised money to help our neighbors through the United Way. It's a wonderful story.
You know, if we just think about one more stadium story, the President's Box went zero waste.
Yes, sir.
And I'm very proud of it. And, you know, I look at the young men and women that basically guard the boxes to make sure you put, I think I've got it down here. But now, you know, another thing that I like is you're constantly working to improve and to do the next thing. So the plan is to go zero waste for the stadium, which seems to me that it would be a phenomenal accomplishment.
Well,
so what's that going to take?
There are a lot of pieces. I do want to mention that Ryan McCaughey, my manager, is leading that initiative, but we have a lot of folks that are doing studies and providing input, and we're talking with the vendors inside of the stadium, and we're seeing if we can select certain types of product and packaging, that we would narrow that stream to more of compostable and very little in the way of trash. So where we might be offering the folks at Beaver Stadium, our fans that come, plastic and compost only, because there'll be nothing else that you would have in there to throw away. So that's what we're doing.
There's really a symbolic value to that as well as a real value. That's
absolutely
something to brag about.
It is, and we are connected with Dart Container. We're connected with the Trex Lumber people. Those are some of the industry folks, and we were even told by the Trex folks that, bragging a little bit, but Samara Norman, who is a Penn State grad and a buyer for Trex, approached us and said that we were the first ones to figure out how to capture plastic film cleanly, and that they could use it in their processes. And so it goes back to the folks on this campus, the faculty, staff, and students that do the right thing every day. We are so pleased.
That brings me, Professor Black, to the role of volunteerism in this, because I know the reason that the stadium project is so successful is because of a lot of volunteer work.
Yes.
How do you get somebody to take this on?
Well, Penn State is an automatic kind of compulsion towards additional help to get volunteers. But I think you have a real commitment, a cultural commitment that, again, if we contrast with earlier eras, is very different today, where this is what people want to be able to do. And planning like Al's carried out and his staff has carried out have made it possible, I think, for people to consume in a smarter way. And that, I think, ultimately is what this is all about, and it helps the university too. Now scale, is what I keep thinking about in terms of this, because at Penn State Altoona, obviously we work on a much smaller scale in these enterprises, but it can still be done, it can still help a great deal. But when you're talking on this scale, that's monumental.
Why, when we talk about the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, why is recycle actually the last resort?
Well, I wouldn't mind if Al took a stab at that one too. But I think that you've lessened what needs to be recycled by accomplishing those first 2 R's first. So I think that was by design. And is that how you interpret it?
Absolutely. If you have a bucket that you bought ice cream in and now you're using it to water your dog, that's reuse. There's no energy involved. You simply reuse it, the item, in another application. The reduce is we're simply lessening the amount that we're generating in the way of waste. Recycle then is what can we do with it when we find no other uses for it. So there's grinding involved, there's other types of machinery and energy involved, and melting and extrusions and things. So that's the less preferred. We use the terms upcycling and downcycling. So if you upcycle something, reuse is the best upcycled choice. It's because you use it as it was intended to be used. So the chair you no longer want, if we sell it at Trash to Treasure and someone uses it as a chair, that's upcycling and that's reuse.
And just think how all that is different from earlier ethics, like we were talking about, where after World War II it was about buying new, it was always needing new, it was planned obsolescence, and so each of those R's is a major change in society, and we have a young generation that I think really expects to be able to do that consuming in a smarter way, and it makes Penn State a very progressive institution, I think.
At one time it took 5 days to clean up after a football game. Because of the efforts of you and so many others, it can be done in a day now.
Yes.
And you said earlier that the money you save could end up becoming a roof on another building at Penn State.
Any money that we save goes back into operations, and the commitment of Physical Plant, one of their missions is excellence in facility management, and that's where the money goes. So the good efforts of the folks on campus, if it saves money in my budget and it goes into operations, it could become a roof on a building or paint on the walls or carpeting on the floor. That's how it is reinvested in the university.
And do you think students, in addition to being committed and believing this is important, do you think they have a high level at which they understand how this works as kind of a almost system that you're continually improving upon?
I don't want to seem too naive, but yes, I do. I think so. And I've been consistently impressed by most of our students, for instance, in the environmental studies program at Altoona, in their complete knowledge of things that our previous generation just kind of came too late.
They know the life cycle of products.
Exactly. And so they are part of a new, more sustainable economy that that I think is making a profound difference and will continue to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And on that note, we're going to have to leave it there. Our thanks to Al Matyasovsky, Program Manager of Penn State Central Support Services and Program Manager for Mobius. Also, Brian Black, Professor of History and Environmental Studies at Penn State Altoona. We'll be back in just a moment to talk one-on-one with President Barron about other important initiatives at Penn State, including improving graduation rates and the time it takes to earn a degree. We'll be right back. As you're well aware, the debate over the cost of a college education has sort of reached fever pitch. And before we drill down on that, is a college education still worth it?
I'm certain it's still worth it. I mean, you could look at it from a lot of different perspectives. Certainly, the evidence is there that the college-educated student makes more and more money through their lives, whereas without it, it's rather stagnant. So many people look at that first job, but you really have to look at the whole history of employment, and I think you see over and over again it's worth it. Now, I will also say that in particular for a Penn State student, it's most certainly worth it. We're at the point now where one major company after another comes to State College for our career fair or goes to our campuses, and the companies have narrowed the number of schools that they're interviewing at, but they're interviewing here because they realize these students are ready. We had 80 companies come from Pittsburgh, 20 companies come from California, 534 companies altogether touched 9,000 students, and many of them said, you know, we've really come to just 2 schools that we want to interview at.
But it's something you said a moment ago. It's the idea that a college education will result in a higher paycheck.
Yes.
That led in the 1970s to Ronald Reagan saying, well, state support doesn't need to be as high because students should take out loans and they should pay for this themselves because they'll reap the benefits later on. And I guess the question then is it an individual good or a societal good to graduate more college graduates?
It's obviously both. So what I would say that the issue is, I mean, we've become a society where we have this expectation that if you get a good, you pay for it. But we also know still that an educated population saves us all money and in fact makes us all more money. So if you take a look at all of the statistics, you realize that you have a segment of the population that don't have the economic support from their parents. And those students are taking longer to graduate because they're working more, taking a lower course load, and so they're paying much more for higher education.
Because they're paying for everything, whether you're taking 13 credits
and they're paying for 5 or 6 years, because if you only take 12, you can't graduate in 4. And so those who least can afford to pay it are doing more poorly, and they're also paying a lot more. And because of that, they're graduating at a lower rate. So this is what I believe should become the focal point of this story, not the $450 tuition increase. It should be the total cost of a degree.
And getting people out in 4 years.
Getting people out in 4, getting out people in 3.5. You got a lot of people that could graduate in 3.
Actually, in England, that's the norm.
Yes, and so I mean, this makes sense, especially with the number of credits that many of our students, you know, come into the system with. That should be our focal point, and in particular to make sure that we're still living our mission, which is to educate the people in the Commonwealth and increasingly the nation, and you're not doing your job with that mission if you've got a segment of people whose family income is under $32,000 and they give up because the cost becomes so large.
So what can a university like Penn State do to get students in and out in 4 years and to get those who drop out a year into their college career to stay?
Well, in fact, I'm rather passionate about this because I came from an institution that had very low tuition, and I pointed to Penn State as, look, they're starting to to exceed a limit potentially, with their rate being number 2 in the nation, Pitt being number 1 for public, and Temple being number 13. There's a Pennsylvania thing going there. So I'm very passionate about this. So we've put together a group that is looking at 20 different options on how to change the time to degree and how to create opportunity and different types of opportunities, everything from using online to different types of scholarships to different types of work programs to enable students to lower the time to degree and lower the cost.
Which is really important, because there are some who say that the amount of student loan debt that young people are carrying today is actually having a drag on the economy.
Yeah, it may be, and I would say that if I take the last class, for which there's 6-year data, class entering 2007-8, they borrowed $23 million to go years 4 and 5. That's a way to send student debt down.
We'll have to leave that here, but I hope this is something we can talk about at a later date. Thanks to our guest this afternoon, Al Matyasovsky, Program Manager of Penn State Central Support Services and Program Manager for Mobius, and Brian Black, Professor of History and Environmental Studies at Penn State Altoona. With Penn State President Dr. Eric Barron, I'm Patty Satalia. For all of us here at WPSU, thanks for joining us.
Support for Higher Education in Focus comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, serving alumni and alma mater for 145 years. On the web at alumni.psu.edu. Penn State Bookstore, improving the student experience at Penn State with philanthropic support of student causes throughout the university. On the Hub Lawn or at psu.bncollege.com. The attorneys of McNeese, Wallace, and Nurek. Your mission, your goal, your lawyers. More at mwn.com. And from viewers like you, thank you.